I came to faith 34 years ago. I come from a Zoroastrian background. I was a Parsi before I was a Christian. I didn't come to faith understanding. I didn't come to faith questioning. I just came through my um, emotions and my heart. I'd always kind of um, feared life after death. That was something that kind of started playing on my mind when I was a teenager. And I was always thinking, what will happen to me when I die? And I knew what the Zoroastrian religion said, I knew what Hinduism said, but still I never searched Christianity, even though I went to a Christian school in England. I was in boarding school and I never questioned it at that time. But I was always kind of worried about that. So my parents were Zoroastrian. I grew up in a Zoroastrian home, but they were not religious. And I went to church every week because we were required to. And it didn't really have an impact. When your heart isn't open, when it's not ready, then you don't receive anything. And I was about 11 or 10 or 11, and I didn't receive anything at that time, or at least felt that way. Now, growing up as a Zoroastrian, you have to have a ceremony done between the ages of like 8 and 10 or 12. And it's something like what the Jews do, the bar mitzvah, but it's a thread ceremony, and then you have to wear this thread and practice a little ritual and say a prayer. And I went throughout school feeling really embarrassed, but doing it because I was always afraid not to do it, not because I did it out of faith or anything, but I did it more out of fear, I would say. So I did that for throughout my school years, and maybe in college I gave it up, I can't remember. Uh, Now, as we were still Zoroastrians, we decided to do then we got married and had two boys, and we decided to do their ceremonies as well. So when we did their ceremonies, that's where I started feeling a real kind of emptiness. And why am I doing this? I don't understand. And I was the one to teach them their prayers because we were not in India and there was no one else to teach them. So I taught them, but it was meaningless to them. It was meaningless to me. And we did the older boys' Navjot first, and then we did the younger one. And at that time, I was questioning a lot, and we went to see a Parsi lady who we hoped would answer some questions, but she wasn't able to. So I came back feeling really empty and kind of a little bit frustrated and not knowing what to do. Now, sometime later, we moved to Geneva, Switzerland, and Jimmy worked for a Sindhi organization, and he had a Sindhi colleague and friend who was a very strong evangelical Christian. And he never missed any opportunity to share with us about what Jesus had done and who Jesus was. And not only his words impacted me, but his life impacted us. He really lived out the Christian faith in a very practical way, going home early from office, and he was high pressure job. So he really lived out his Christian faith. In Geneva, there was also a Christian radio station, English one, and you might have heard of it, some of you, called Focus on the Family. And they focus a lot on Christian values in the home, like how to bring up your children, relationships within husband and wife, relationships at work, and all of that. So that was a very practical kind of advice, and it really also affected me. So when we had when we went out with Ram, he would always talk about the Christian faith, and I would always ask questions, but I never had the courage to just say, this is what I want. Inside of me, I knew it was what I wanted, and it was probably what was right for me, but I just didn't have the courage to face it and to move forward and to make that big change, because I always looked back and thought, my family will think this, and my family. And I was right, because I had a lot of opposition, not from my mother or from Jimmy, but from the broader family. And it was very difficult because they perceived me as like they look at you as a traitor. And so we had a lot of persecution from them. No, a lot, but we had some, a fair amount. So anyway, I was still struggling and not sure. And then um, I had problems with my eldest son, and those problems kind of led me to ask more questions and led me to think that where is God in all of this? He wasn't answering my questions. I felt distant. I felt aloof. I felt he was not a real God. I didn't feel like he was near me, and I kept reaching out. I kept praying more. I kept doing um, my little thread thing more, thread ceremony every day, and praying that something would draw me closer to God, but nothing did. And so we carried on this way. I was feeling frustrated, and then when we had lots of problems with Sahan, I then turned to uh, that's where God kind of really spoke to me. We had lots of conversations with Ram. In one conversation, he said to me, I said to him rather, I said, I like your Christian God, I like your Jesus, and I would like to follow him. But I said, I will follow my own faith as well. So he said, you cannot do that, because he explained why. He explained that Jesus died for me and that he was the only way. There was only one way to God, and that was through Jesus. When he said that, I thought, I'm not ready for this. So I closed that book and I didn't look back for, I'm not sure how long, but it was a while. And in the meantime, I carried on struggling and carried on reflecting and carried on thinking and carried on wishing that I had the courage, but I didn't have the courage. But God has His timing in everything. So one fine day when I was feeling really low and really, really, I was kind of ready by then, I think. And then I had a conversation with Ram, and he spoke to me and he reminded me of God's love for me, how God would never leave me, how God would help me, carry me. And so I just kind of let go at that time of my fears, of my doubts and everything. And when he said, your hands are never tied and your arms are never tied in chains. You can turn away anytime. So I was like, what have I got to lose? So on that basis, I said to Ram, okay, I will accept Jesus. So he said a prayer over the phone. He was in London, I was in Geneva, and he said a prayer, and I accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior. When I did that, I felt like a rock had fallen from my back. I felt so relieved. I felt so kind of free, and I was so excited. But um, I knew Jimmy wouldn't be that excited. But anyway, when he came home from work, I told him. I said, Jimmy, this, thank you. He knew because we talked about it before, and he too was influenced, and he too was struggling. But we have very separate stories, very separate ways of doing it, approaching things. So I told him, and he said, "That's good for you, Geets, but it's not for me, and I'm happy for you." So at least he wasn't opposing anything, and but he did say, "I don't want you to involve the children. I don't want you to." I don't know his words, but pull the children into this. And so I said, okay. But I knew that was not going to be, that was not me, because I knew that once I took this step, I knew it was going to happen. So for a little while, I didn't tell the children because we'd just done the thread ceremonies, and guess who taught them the prayers? It was me. So I thought, what, they're going to think I'm a complete hypocrite. So I did take a little while, but I finally told them. And I said, this is what has happened. And they were so excited. They said, oh, wow, can we become Christian? My sons were 8. He was 8, I think, Nash. And I held them back. I said, not really, until you understand a little bit. And I think they were doing it more from a social point of view. Their friends were Christian. They went to a school which was in a European country. And so they were kind of all excited to jump onto the bandwagon. But I said, no. I said, let's wait a little bit and let's see how things progress. Let's talk about it. Let's try and understand before you take a step. And of course, Jimmy was on my back saying, don't involve the children. And they were asking questions. So I said to Jimmy, why don't you and I take it in turns? We'll go into their room at bedtime. One night you speak to them, one night I will speak to them. And let them make up their minds. They're old enough, they're 8 and 12, or 8.5 and 12. So Jimmy agreed. So I would go in, I would tell them about the Bible, and we'd read stories, and they could relate to the characters, they could relate to the Bible stories, and they became excited. And then the next night, Jimmy would go in, and I'd be on my knees praying that the boys wouldn't hear anything, and they wouldn't really. And that didn't take much. I knew that Jimmy wouldn't have that much to say because he was like me. We were kind of on the fringes of Zoroastrianism, not understanding it. So he would go in, he'd be out in 2 or 3 or 5 minutes, and we carried on like that. Then the boys said, we want to come to church. And Jimmy was reluctant, but he let them come. So he started coming to church, and then finally they came to the Lord as well. And when they came to the Lord is around the time I think I got my illness, my different problems started raising their heads. And those boys were, at least the younger one, Nash, he was so on fire for God at that time from a young age. And God really gifted him with a powerful gift of prayer. And very often, I had a condition called restless leg syndrome, which threw me out of bed every night, 3 or 4 times at night. Sometimes I would just be kind of tearing my hair out. Most of the time, I'd be walking the corridors praying for Zahan, who was still a little bit rebellious. And I'd be storming the heavens and doing the spiritual warfare, which my Christian friend had taught me how to fight the devil when he keeps attacking you with different um, uh, problems and different, uh, all sorts of different things coming your way. So I learned very quickly how to do a spiritual warfare. So I would do this walking up and down the corridor, and within about, God, from maybe 2 weeks or so, I saw Zahan's life slowly changing. And then he went to a Christian camp, and his life was really touched. So we knelt down on my bed and we prayed, and it was a very powerful time. I asked him for forgiveness, and he really, he really kind of mellowed a lot after that. But he still had that rebellious. He had a strong independent streak anyway. So when I had these restless legs, I would get out of bed, I would pray for him, and sometimes I'd go out into the garden. I would be so upset that I couldn't sleep and I was so tired. I'd just be walking in the garden and I'd be kind of ranting at God and saying, Lord, I can't take this. How long is this going to go on for? And then one day I suddenly realized that, I can keep on ranting, but where is it going to get me? God's not going to keep on listening to my ranting if I'm not going to pray and worship Him. So I took out my CD player and I put my praise music on. I'd be crying and walking around the garden. And then I started praising God. I started praising Him, even though I didn't feel like it, even though my heart was not in praise. But I still felt that, if I don't praise God and thank Him for where He's brought me and where He's brought me to, nothing is going to change. I felt that strongly in my spirit. And so I started walking around the garden. Sometimes I'd go running into the forest if it was daytime, and I would pray. And I was amazed at how God answered my prayer. It was when I started praising Him that I started taking my focus off all my problems, all my um, emotions, and all the anger kind of dissipated a bit. And God started answering prayers. And I don't know how long later, but not that long later, I got a drug, which was a very strong drug, which I'm on till today. And that kept me in bed most of the night. Not all night, but most of the night. But in that interim period when I was ranting and struggling, I I I would be up multiple times in the night, and I'd be up and down. So next morning, I thought one, it was a Saturday night, and I was doing that. And on Sunday morning, everybody got ready for church, and I was thinking, well, I might as well go because my legs had not calmed down. I wouldn't sleep, so I went. Then we came back, and I gave them lunch, and then they went off to do their own thing. And my son had a computer and a um, uh, table in the landing on the upstairs landing, and I was in the kitchen, and I was crying, and he heard. We came down. He said, "What's wrong, Mum?" I said, "You know what, son? I'm really fed up. I've walked all night, and now I still can't sleep." So he said, "Mum, I'm going to pray for you." So I said, "Okay, good." So he took me, and that was the first time I'd really witnessed how powerful his prayers were. So he said, "Come, let's go into the room." So he took me into a little room we had next to the kitchen, and I sat there, and he prayed for me. And I felt a real kind of calm, and my legs were quiet. And he looked at me, he said, "Are you feeling better, Mum?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Then lie down and go to sleep." I said, "No, I'm not going to lie down. If I lie down, you'll start again." He said, "Mom, where's your faith?" I felt like that small. So I said, "Okay, I'll lie down." And I lay down, and I had a wonderful sleep for maybe 45 minutes. And then I was feeling fine. So that was one of many occasions when he prayed for me, and I really felt, a dramatic change within me. And yeah, so they were both a big support to me. And the friends at church were also a big support because Jimmy was not, he was a Christian by then, but he had a very stressful job, and he was required to do long hours. So he was kind of pulled between everything. And between all that, I was in hospital for 2 months. So he was struggling with all of that. So my friends came around me, and they wouldn't let me go to any tests or anything on my own. They accompanied me to everything. They were so supportive, and they were such strong Christians as well, the two or three of them. So my faith grew a lot, grew a lot through this restless leg syndrome, which I felt was just the worst illness ever, and I just was dying to get rid of it. But God was using it. God was using it to draw me closer to Him. He was using it to draw the children closer to Him, and to really, it impacted him. It impacted me, and it impacted my kids a lot, I think. So God uses these things when we think are really frustrating, and we just don't want to um, go through them. So, I really also realized that faith is a very multifaceted thing. It has many faces. I started learning to trust God through my illness, because I was ill so soon after I became a Christian. So I learned to trust God, and I learned to do the spiritual warfare. And I, when there was a time when I was getting some very strong spasms or something in my leg, and I found there was a numbness, and I couldn't move. It was about 5:30 or 6 in the morning. So I woke Jimmy up. I said, "Jimmy, I want you to raise your hands, and I'm going to pray." And I explained. So just as Joshua raised his hands and Moses prayed, I did the same thing. Was it Joshua raised his hands? Yes. Moses raised his hand. I got confused. Moses raised, yeah. So Joshua prayed, and Moses. So I said to Jimmy, "Please do that for me." And I was thinking of calling my friends who I knew were like 6:30 risers, and I wouldn't be disturbing them. So I thought, well, let me try praying before. So I lay in bed and I prayed, and Jimmy raised his hands. And within about 5 minutes, I don't know, 5 minutes felt like my symptoms had gone. All the kind of numbness in my legs and numbness in my arms, it had gone. And I was like, wow. And so it was so encouraging. And then we called our friends and they came and they had breakfast with us and prayed, and it was wonderful. So, all this to say that I had faith when it came to my illness. When it came to other areas of my life, I found that faith was lacking dramatically. So, faith is a very, for me, it's been that way. I've been not, even now, I'm not strong in my faith in some areas. I struggle a lot. And in some areas, I find that it's just, God just comes. And I found that the power of praise is what I discovered through this time storming the heavens in the garden or in the forest. That when you start praising God, your mind is elevated to another level. And so we then, we just, uh, so my journey is now um, 34 years on, and I'm so uh, grateful to God for what He has done, because where I came from, there was a lot of fear, there was a lot of anxiety, there was a lot of, you know, you have to do this because this will happen, or not do this because this will happen. There's a lot of superstition as well. So when I came to Christ, it was like I felt so free, and I felt that I could be more myself. And I was, and I rubbed a lot of people up the wrong way, and they were quite uh, agitated with the way I would just share my faith. I was in hospital, and I was very bold, and I would share my faith very openly. But um, I had a big argument with my cousin, and so he said, "You're telling me I'm going to hell." I said, "I'm not telling you that. I'm just saying that Jesus is the only way to heaven. I'm not telling you that. God is the judge. I'm not. And I'm just telling you what the Bible says." So from that time on, I became less bold. I kind of started pulling back a little bit and became a bit more timid anyway. So I'm just so grateful to God from where I've come to where He's now brought me.